All right, thank you very much. And now that I've said all that, I'm going to start hitting the record button here, and I'll transfer it to you folks from OPNsense. The floor is yours. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very nice to be here today and see if we can speak a little bit about OPNsense and Suricata. I am Jos Gellevis. I'm a co-owner of the CISO and also co-founder of OPNsense and a member of the core team. And I'm here with Ad Gellevis. I'm Ad Gellevis, also co-owner of the CISO and core developer since the start of our project back in 2014. And thank you all for joining. It's very nice to have this opportunity. We will introduce you today to a great combination of OPNsense and Suricata. And the goal today is that by the end of this workshop, you will be able to leverage intrusion detection and prevention using Suricata on OPNsense, using ET Pro Telemetry rule set, and without having to edit a single configuration file manually. But first, let me introduce OPNsense. OPNsense is a full-blown open source firewall, router, and security platform. And with its comprehensive feature set, it directly competes with large commercial players like Cisco or Palo Alto, Juniper, and others. Whatever the requirements for your network are, it's very likely that OPNsense can play a major role. From the plain firewall to virtual private network controller or a domain filter via the built-in web proxy, it can do it all with ease. And the latter is probably the main reason why many people choose OPNsense, besides the obvious course, it's free. And as its intuitive web-based user interface lets you control all aspects of the platform without having to do anything on the CLI. Now, the days of simple firewall rules to keep the bad packets out is long gone, as criminals have found much more prudent ways to steal your data or money by utilizing techniques like phishing or Trojans or malware. And now this is where Suricata comes into play to protect your network via deep packet inspection and high quality rules that can detect this type of traffic and either alert or block it entirely. So let's head over to let's see. Yeah. Okay. So now you have the basics, and let's head over to our. Sorry, I'm wrong here. So what we will do today is we'll start with the basic configuration of OPNsense, and for this we presume you have already installed it on compatible hardware. And next we'll show you the setup on Suricata to detect, alert, or prevent block intrusions. We'll give you a short walkthrough on where and how to get a valid key for the ET Pro Telemetry and how to enable it by installing and configuring the plugin. And the next steps including the rule policies when running into issues. If during the webinar you have questions, you can drop them into the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer as many as we can.
A quick question from me. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just sure. I just want to make sure the. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure the recording takes the slides, and I was just asking if you'd go to the next slide. Thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption. Apologies.
No problem. Okay. So let's see. We have we start with a basic configuration for this demonstration. And what you see is on the left side, you have one client, which is on the LAN side of the firewall. And of course, OPNsense in the middle. And on the right side, we have our provider. And what we have set up here is the basic setup of OPNsense. And that means that on the LAN side, the client automatically gets an IP address from the OPNsense system by dhcp. And we suspect that the provider will provide a dhcp on its end, so the system will receive an IP address on the LAN side from the provider. So it's a very basic and simple setup just for demonstration purposes. Now, for our setup, we have elected to connect our WAN side of things to our internal network. So we will have a private IP address there. And that's important, and I'll explain later in the demonstration why that's important to know. So, okay, now we have the basics, and we head over to our web interface. And for that, we open the browser and go to 192.168.1.1, which is the default IP address when you install OPNsense. And as you can see, you get a security notice, which of course is because of the certificates not being able to be checked as it's just an IP address. So we have to accept this and the risk and continue. Now we have to log in, and the default username and password for OPNsense is root and OPNsense, and open as in OPN, which is a common mistake here. So important to take notice of that. And the first thing you see is you get greeted by the installation wizard. So we'll go through the initial setup by clicking next. And here you can set some stuff that we will leave default for now, but you can set your host name and domain name, and you can select your language and stuff like that. We'll leave everything default for demonstration purposes. So click next. And here we can select the time servers and time zone, and we'll change it to Europe, Amsterdam, as we are in the Netherlands. And we'll click next. And as you can see here, we go directly to the configuration for the WAN interface. I'm not going into the details, but it's currently set up for dhcp. The only thing is that there is an option below here, block private networks from entering the WAN. And this is enabled by default, as we normally suspect that you will have a public IP on the WAN side. So if you do not, you have to disable it, as we have to do, but we'll leave it enabled because I'll show you later on how to do that if you forgot it. So we click on next here. And then we have our default LAN setup, which is the 192.168.1.1/24. Not going to change anything there either. The root password you can change here. We leave it on OPNsense for demonstration purposes, so we can just click next. And this was the wizard. So we're all set for the demonstration. For now, we go to the firewall setup. That's the first thing we need to do. So we go to the firewall, and I'll show you two ways to disable the rules, to disable the rule that we want to disable the private networks. So the first thing you can do is, of course, go to the interfaces and do it manually by there. So you go to the WAN section and you select the option block private networks. And then you have to save that. So if you did not find it this way and you forgot that particular way to do it as well, there's even a third option. And you can do that when you're in the firewall, because the firewall also knows everything it's generated automatically. So under firewall rules WAN, we have the option to look at the automatically generated rules. And we click on that icon, it says the number of rules that are automatically generated. And we see all the automatically generated rules. So if we click on the block private network here, then you will see it will lead us to the same page again. The interface is WAN, and with an arrow, it shows you what item you need to change. So that are the basics for setting this up. Back to the firewall. There are a few important things that you need to know when you administer the OPNsense firewall. And the first thing is that the default behavior is that it checks the traffic on the inbound side of things. So you have to always keep that in mind. You can change that behavior, but the default is it checks the traffic when it comes in on an interface. So if you want to block anything going out to the WAN side, you will have to do that on the interface where the traffic comes in, if you use the default. It's also a stateful firewall, so meaning that it automatically opens the return path. So if you go to a website and you have opened port 443, you can go to that website and you get a reply back. And of course, since it's stateful, it knows the way back to your client and allows that traffic by default. There's also one other common mistake that people make by changing rules. They expect them to be applied immediately. And of course, if you apply the rules, they will be applied immediately, but the states that are already in there will not be changed. So meaning if you have an SSH session open and it's active and you block SSH, that active session will not be blocked immediately. That will take time because it has a time to live. So eventually it will be dropped and new connections will be dropped immediately. That will be blocked immediately. So that are a couple of things that you need to know for our firewall setup. The last thing that you need to know is the importance of the rule order. So rules are evaluated based on the order in this list. So if you create a new rule, you can move them around and make sure that they are in the right order. And it's important to know that the first rule that matches is actually also the last rule that it will normally evaluate because the rules are quick. That's all about the OPNsense firewall setup. And now we'll head over to the intrusion detection and prevention, meaning Suricata. If you go to the administration section, you will see you have a couple of options here, and I'll explain only 3 options here. The first is enable. You can enable it. If you do not, of course, it doesn't do anything. And if you enable it, it will be enabled in intrusion detection modus. So it will only alert. The second option is the IPS mode. If you enable IPS, it is an inline protection modus and it will do prevention. So it can block traffic, drop in this case. And the last thing that you need to look at is the interface section. The interface section is currently on WAN. Now there is a reason why that's probably not a good idea for your network, because most of the networks have NAT used for their WAN sites. And if you do so, then the problem is that all the traffic seems to be originating from your WAN site, from your firewall itself, because all the traffic is going to the same netted IP. So in that case, if you have a NAT on your WAN, it will be better to use the LAN side because most of the rules apply very well to the LAN side, even better than on the WAN side, unless of course you have you don't use any NAT. In that case, it's no problem to use the LAN side. We always select the LAN, so it's a good default option to do in that way. So first, for this experience, we will show you how to use the intrusion detection modus. So we enable it and we place it on LAN. And now we apply this setting. So what happens on the back end is that now Suricata will be started with these default settings. However, we did not apply any rule. So Suricata is started without any rules, so it doesn't do anything now. So what we will do first is we will check if the setup is working. And to do that, we have a test rule. And the test rule is located at the bottom. And it's the OPNsense updetect/test. So we have to install this rule. We select the rule and we enable it by selecting enable selected. Now, the thing is, you might think it's already enabled. It isn't, because it is a 2-step way of activating it. So the first step is to say to the system that you want to use this rule. And the second one is to download and apply this rule. So you have to press download and update the rules. Besides downloading the rule sets, it also shows you now that it has downloaded the rule by that category by showing you a timestamp. And with that timestamp, you're always able to see that it has been downloaded recently. Now, of course, you want your rules to be updated frequently. So we also have to set a schedule for that. And for that, there is an option on the last tab, and it's called schedule. There is a default schedule, but it's not enabled. So you have to enable this. If you enable this, it will just download your rules every day at midnight. So that's a perfectly sane default, and you can change it to anything you like, but most of the rule sets are only updated daily. So this is basically what you have to do to set it up. Now we're going to test it. So we have selected a test rule, and this test rule is only what it does actually is it's the ICAR test file. It sees if you're trying to access that ICAR test file, like it's used for virus scanning as well. So we are going to download this rule manually by doing a curl. And as you can see here, it downloads that file perfectly. So it doesn't block anything, but if it's working now, you should see that in the alert section of the intrusion detection system. So if you go back to the GUI, you will see in the alert section that it has allowed our traffic, but it detected the OPNsense test ICAR virus rule.
Peter, there was something in the Q&A highlighted on top, but I'm not sure what this does in Zoom.
Yeah, I see the question. Is there a link to understand the reason for checking LAN in services intrusion detection administration interfaces? Can we have both LAN and WAN selected?
Yeah, you can have both selected, but usually it's not very it's not very sensible to do so, because your traffic is heading in both directions. But let's say, for example, that you have different internal networks. So let's say you have a public network, you have a private network, and in the same company you have one upstream link. Then you probably want to enable your IDS or IPS on both interfaces, so you can just enable both interfaces within the same select box. So as long as the traffic is only hitting once, well, that makes sense to enable both interfaces. If the traffic is always hitting twice, it doesn't really make sense. It only costs you CPU cycles.
Yeah, so that was a question. Okay, we will head on. Of course, we'll have at the end of our presentation, at the end of the webinar, we also have a Q&A section, so you can ask any question and we'll answer it then as well. So looking back to the GUI, we have now successfully tested that Suricata is running. It is doing what it's supposed to do, in this case, giving us an alert on the ICAR test file. Now, of course, the nice and interesting thing of OPNsense is that you can use it as an inline solution and block the traffic. To do that, we enable IPS modus. One important thing, if we do that, we apply it, of course. One important thing that I want to take you to is that the interface section, you have several options there to select offloading. And the important thing to know with intrusion detection and IPS modus is that we use Netmap, and Netmap is not able to work with these hardware offloading features because it's missing data, and then it cannot do its task. So you have to disable all these offloading settings like we did here. There is no performance degradation here because Netmap is much faster than the normal behavior of the firewall. So instead of losing any performance, you're gaining. So don't worry, disable this if you did not do that before, and save it, and then we go back to testing. So now we have put it into IPS modus, and we can look at our rule again, our test rule, and our test rule currently is in alerting modus, but we want to block. So we're going to change that by selecting it again and select enable drop. So now the filter will be changed from alerting modus to drop. And if we download and update the rules again, it will actually update this rule. So again, we're going to try the same curl. And instead of getting any data back, you see we do not get any data back. This is the behavior we expected. So looking now at the alert again, we do see that it's blocked several times. So this is how you set up block rules. So, of course, OPNsense does not come with a test rule alone. We do have a couple of other rules already in there. These rules are categorized. There are rules from abuse, abuse.ch, and normally these rules you can safely apply. The only thing in there that you need to be a little bit careful about is the SSL fingerprint blacklist, because SSL fingerprints take much more CPU time than the other rules with IP lists. So if you enable the SSL fingerprint blacklist, you need to be sure that you have sufficient CPU power available to do that. Of course, you can enable it and check if your download rate drops to something that you do not want, and then you probably know where you have to look at. The second thing in here are the ET open rules. ET open are the rule sets that Proofpoint provides for free and contain open source rules. So they can be old, they can be new, but in general there are quite some nice rules in there, and you can use them instead of what we are going to show, the ET Pro or ET Pro Telemetry rules. The only thing here is you have to be a little bit careful by selecting rules, because there are rules in here that are very useful, and there are some in there that you might not want to select. So just look at the names, like you want to block malware, but maybe you do not want to block games. You want to block Trojans, but maybe you do not want to block your chat session. So
the Q&A popped up again, but
yeah, maybe are we going to answer that now, or
I'm not sure.
Peter, what do you want to do? Do you want to look at the Q&A at the end?
I think you can take them all at the end. So finish your presentation. What I suggest, usually that's how we do it, and then we take all the questions one by one, and we can.
Yeah. Okay. So that's fine, and then we
Is
head
that
back
okay
to
with
the...
you?
Yeah, sure. We're newbies.
yeah. So we head back to the space and show what I would like to know. So that's basically it. So the nice thing we also offer, which is not in here, but you can apply for it, is the ET Pro Telemetry. And the difference between ET Pro or ET Open, ET Pro Telemetry, is that these telemetry rules are more tailored to the parameter firewall. So they are much more tailored to your normal business setup. So if you enable those rules, all those rules, then you will not have rules in there that you most likely do not want to use. Also, these rules are new. So it means that they are containing commercial rules and that these rules are updated more frequently. We have a nice documentation on how the telemetry rule set works and how you can apply for it. So after this session is over, you might want to check docs.opnsense.org and take a look at this page. Let's take a look at how you can apply for the ET Pro rules. For that, you have to go to our OPNsense shop, which is shop.opnsense.com. And don't worry, you don't have to pay anything for it, you just have to register for it. And you'll immediately notice there are two ways to do that. You can select the ET Pro rules, you have to pay for those if you want those, or you can select the ET Pro Telemetry rules. And the ET Pro Telemetry rules are in the most same part similar to the ET Pro rules. The only thing is that you share data with Proofpoint. So you give them some data back. And that data is anonymized. It's also all explained in the documentation. So if you're worried about what we share, take a look at that. Of course, we don't share any user information. So any information you provide on this website, on this shop, we will not provide that to Proofpoint. We'll only provide them with the request for a new token. So they'll know you have a new token. And if you share data with them, of course, your public IP address is shared with them too. That's automatically in how internet works. To apply, you have to accept the end user agreement. And to do so, you have to read it all, or at least scroll to the back end of that page before you can apply or say that you have read it and accept it. And if you do so, you can add it to your cart and order it. The rest of the order process is similar to any other product you would order in any other shop. And when you have ordered the product, it can take a couple of hours, but then you get a token. And that token, as you can see, you cannot do anything with it right away. For that, you have to install a plugin. The nice thing of OPNsense is that you can have a lot of different features that are not into the standard system, but you can add them later on. And for that, you go to System, File, Firmware, and you go to Plugins. And if this list does not immediately appear, you wait a couple of seconds. If it does not appear, then you just click on Update. And then these items do appear after it has checked for an update. So here we will install the OS-ET Pro Telemetry plugin, which is highlighted here. To do so, we just click on the plus sign on the right side of this item. And then we wait very shortly because it's already done. So now it has installed the plugin. So then we go to back to the services section, intrusion detection. And by the way, if you're looking where all these items are, you can also use the top right search menu bar. And if you type any item in there, like intrusion, you will see that it automatically shows you all the options that are there, and you can select one. And then you enter up on the right page automatically. So this is very handy if you're getting to know the firewall. And if you know where it is, you can click on the right page immediately. So back to this same section, we want to enable the ET Pro Telemetry rules. For that, we go to the download. And in this download section, we now have an additional option to enter our token. So for this demonstration, we have rigged the firewall a little bit, so we can enter any token that's not valid. So don't try this at home. This is not going to work. So if you had hit save now, you have successfully enabled your token, but you have not enabled any rules yet. To enable all the ET Pro Telemetry rules, you can select them at once by using the search box at the top and enter ET Telemetry or ET or anything that matches, and select them all at once. Now we can enable them and we can set a drop filter because all these rules have been checked. So normally you would not have any issues with these and you can just set them to drop like we do here. So now you see they're set to drop, but they're not installed. So same thing as before, we have to make sure that it's downloaded and updated. And you'll notice the save button that we just used to enable the ET Pro Telemetry token. This is also new here. We didn't see that before. Also part of the plugin. So now all these rules have been downloaded and Suricata is being started at the back, restarted with these rules. So you can see in the timestamp again that these rules have been enabled. There's nothing more to it. That's basically it. That's all you need to know to enable ET Telemetry rule set. Again, you can make different choices here and disable parts of the rules. You can even look into the specific rules and do all those kind of stuff in there. So you can make changes in here. You can search for specific rules, but normally you would not have to do that. Nice thing in here is that you also see there is a reference to the rule. So you can also look up a little bit more data on it. Not going into that any further. So let me see. So now we have seen how to set up a rule, how to set it into drop mode, how to enable the ET Pro Telemetry. There is one more thing with ET Telemetry, is that we have a very nice widget, a desktop widget. So we go to the lobby, dashboard, and we're going to enable the widget. For that, we have to add the widget to the dashboard. And we select telemetry status and we close it. And for now you see that the telemetry status widget has appeared at the bottom. However, there is no data in it. And that's exactly how every new widget is visualized when adding it for the first time. To get it activated, you have to hit Save Settings. And then it will be filled. Now you can also move this to other location if you want, and hit Save Settings again to make sure that it's persistent. So in this demonstration, we have used an illegal token, so it doesn't work. So you get no information here. But we can show you how it looks if we take a look at the documentation again. So that is when you enter a token that's not correct. And here it is if you enter a correct token. Then you will see it's active. You will see the last event that it sent. You will see the last rule download. And you will see when it's last sent a heartbeat to Proofpoint. And that's basically all there is to it. So there's only one more thing that I would like to show you here, and that's how to change a policy or disable a rule when you run into issues. And for that, we're going to use the same rule again, and we go to alerts as we used for the testing. So let's say we do not want to block or alert anymore on the ICAR test rule. Let's say this is valid data. We know it's there. We want to use it for test. The only thing we have to do is we select that rule, and then we can just either change it or disable it like we do here. We close it. And now there's one more important thing. You have to go back to settings, because remember, it didn't do anything. It just changed the filter. It did not apply anything. So we have to go back to settings and apply it. Okay, this takes a little bit of time. And when it is reloaded, we are going back to the test, and we're going to try the curl again. And as you can see, it works again. It's not blocked. And if we go to the alert, since we disabled it, there's also no noisy alert anymore. So the last alert we got is the block that we received early. So that's basically it. I think we are done with what we wanted to explain in this webinar. So I would say let's go to the questions and answers.
Sure. Can you folks read them out, or you want me to read them out? Whichever is easier for you. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Sorry?
I can, if you'd like me to, I can start with the first question, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
With you. Yeah, sure. I can just read them out loud. Okay, so the first question that we have here is, if I want to, from Cami, if I want to detect and prevent attacks to two different directions, is it required to use LAN and WAN interfaces for Suricata? 1, detect attacks against the web server running on LAN but has 443 exposed using NAT. And question 2, detect infected clients on LAN site that try to connect to CNC, for example.
Yeah. So you mean if a client, for instance, gets an email with a phishing link in it, and it clicks on that, it goes to the WAN site. If you need to enable the detection on the WAN as well, I think I'll just try to explain that too. That you do not have to enable both interfaces, because it checks the traffic coming from that client on the LAN side, and also knows by that rule that it should not be able to connect to that IP address that's on that list. So in that case, no, you don't have to detect both WAN and LAN, because the rule will apply for that traffic on the WAN side as well.
Okay. Then we have question number 2. Can firewall filter be based on location? For example, if user wants to drop all traffic except source US, can we do that?
You can use aliases for that. When you're using the normal OPNsense version, you have to create an account at a GeoIP provider such as MaxMind. But it's pretty easy to do. It's also explained in the doc. There you create an alias which automatically updates all the IP address blocks from all the countries, and you can use that alias within a rule. So then you can say, well, let's say, for example, you have a web server internally, which you only want to be able to be reachable from the Netherlands. Then you create a rule on the one end saying that you want to allow traffic coming from the Netherlands heading to your internal web server.
Yeah, there's only one thing, of course, you need to be aware of, that dual IP lists are not perfect, so there might be some false positives or false negatives in there. So that's one caveat that you have to be aware of. But basically, that works very well.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. So next question. I read in OPNsense forums that there are some issues with throughput speed when using Suricata. Is this a problem with the new iflib interface from BSD, or is it Suricata related? Thanks.
If it's in principle, what of course people are experiencing is that they have a very nice network traffic of 100 megabits on their a little bit older appliance. And then they enable Suricata, and they did not anticipate that Suricata inspects all the packets. So inspecting packets costs a lot of time. So that means that if you have newer hardware, that will be no problem. But if you have a little bit older hardware, you might run into some performance degradation issues. But that's only because your firewall is doing much more than it was doing before. If it's related to a question on latest versions, there has been some Netmap issues. I don't know if there are performance issues. I don't think so, but
no, there were more or less some stability issues in relation to certain drivers. That's also a bit challenging with Netmap. But well, if it works, it works pretty optimal, but as you also explained, doing deep packet inspection is quite time consuming. So if you can do a gigabit performance on your firewall with ease, that doesn't mean that you can automatically inspect all the traffic with a lot of rules from emerging threats, for example. It needs power, and certainly for gigabits and above, well, it can get a little bit more complicated. Sometimes it helps to choose different schedulers. What you can do, the defaults are pretty basic. You can use the
Hyperscan.
You can use Hyperscan as long as it's compatible with your hardware. It is faster. But it's no miracle in that respect. If your machine can't cope with it, it can't cope with it.
The Hyperscan setting is in the setting. There's in the basic menu, the first menu, where we also selected the interface. So there you can select what type of you want to use, and you can select the Hyperscan option there.
Okay. I can relate to optimization and tuning. We do the same on Suricata on any side. So thank you very much for that detailed explanation. Next question. Do you have a guide to optimize Netmap or Suricata for peak performance on FreeBSD OPNsense?
No, not really. For optimization, not really. It either works or it doesn't. There has been quite some work, certainly from the guys from Sunny Valley lately. They contributed a lot because they depend on Netmap as well.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of optimization settings over there, and since Suricata in our case is, well, it should be easy to configure. We don't offer all the options from your guide, for example. If you want to do bleeding edge with Suricata, there are well, you have your performance guidelines, which are pretty difficult to implement for us for a general audience.
Yeah.
So we seek sane values. Good enough for most people. You can probably do better if you do it manually.
Yeah, only on FreeBSD, I think there are little, there's not much tuning you can do that actually makes a lot of sense. We did test with, at least with the hardware that we use, mostly Intel based. We didn't see much performance changes by changing all the specifics in the Suricata configuration files. So we tested with T-Rex and pushed a lot of traffic over it, and the settings that we have seem to be very sane. So maybe you can push a little bit more traffic through it if you know what you're doing, but I think you would rather want to set it up manually on maybe just a Linux system and run only Suricata on that. Might be easier if you're looking for that. If you're looking for the simplest solution that you can just hit and run, then OPNsense is a good alternative. It's a fire and forget.
All right, thank you. Next question, and we have about 10 more, just FYI, folks.
Oh, no, we have time. That's good.
Yeah, sure. Is there a graph to show the Suricata stats?
No. We don't offer a lot of insights into Suricata. You can connect to other solutions quite easily, but a lot of setups use the Elasticstack Kibana option. But for us, Elasticsearch Kibana is too large for most of the installations, so we don't offer it ourselves. But you can easily ship ETH logs using syslog, and then you can pass them over there. But it's not something we support.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How can we receive a report daily?
Same answer.
Yeah.
Not really. No, we don't have a lot of. There is. I think there are some options with Monit, if I'm not mistaken, but out of the box we don't offer an easy to set up reporting there.
In principle, the general idea of what we have here is that people can enable it and make sure that it has some same defaults, runs perfectly, and you don't have to be a specialist to check the rules every day and all the alerts every day. So I think the intended audience is just people like you and me who have a network, who need some additional protection. Besides just having a firewall, but are not always the specialist. Of course you are, but not most of the consumers that use OPNsense and the businesses that use OPNsense are certainly not Suricata specialists.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is it possible to set up specific rules for different interfaces?
No, unfortunately not. We have been looking into that, but we're missing a feature in Suricata to do that, because you can have rule sets per interface in intrusion detection mode, but in version 5, as far as I know, you can't do that in intrusion prevention mode, which kind of defeats the purpose on our end. And we don't want to spin up different instances of Suricata, because that would be how do I say that? That would be suboptimal for your machine to have different processes from Suricata running. It can't balance its own processes anymore.
So basically, you mean that's a feature request we need to do, right?
Yeah, that's a feature request.
Yes.
Sure.
We should have these Q&As more often. That's very
excellent. No, well, absolutely, sure thing. So maybe if I'm not sure, I cannot remember off the top of my head right away, but if there is If there is no such an issue open, please feel free to open one as it is coming from a user, so we can at least discuss further if it's not open. I don't remember off the top of my head. Okay, thank you. Next question. Hello, the advanced settings to client and to server. How does this setting change the behavior of Suricata? Thanks. I'm not really sure what that is. Hello, I'm going to read the question again. Hello, the advanced settings to client and to server. How does this setting change the behavior of the Suricata? Thanks. I think I'm not sure if it's meant more in terms of a rule or in terms of settings in OPNsense. I'm really not sure.
I wouldn't know where to look, to be honest.
No, I think the user reframe that question and then take a look at it. Can open the web page.
In general, traditionally, when a lot of Suricata use, a lot of Suricata rules use the direction to client and to server, and basically that locks in the directionality of what you want to inspect in that rule. And this is like rule specific, I think. So if you write a rule that you want to alert or to drop and similar things, that with to client and to server decides you lock the direction that you actually want to do. It's usually especially with flow established. This is a bit more of a rule writing, I would think, though, in that case.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will answer your question. Otherwise, we'll take it on the forums in Suricata for sure. Okay, thank you. Next question. And will there be available recording for the webinar? Would be great to have a chance to enter it again. Yes, absolutely. The webinar is recorded. Next question. Which are the requirements in terms of hardware specs for 1 gig links and 10 gig links to run Suricata, of course, on top? Or at least, what do you recommend in out of your appliances, for example, and similar?
Difficult. The 10 gig, that will be difficult to reach. 10 gig limit with the current setup. I think in our testing with Xeon processors, we did about 3-4. I think in the latest version, the latest FreeBSD version has become faster. I haven't measured it for a couple of months now, so I'm not entirely sure. I think we can do about 4 to 5 or maybe 6 on the regular Xeon processors without any specific optimizations which are not available in the user interface. For gigabit performance, it's easier. Faster PC, something like fast i5 is probably enough to do a gigabit.
Yeah. Okay. I think if you have a Passmax score of 4,000 or 5,000 or over, you probably can do somewhere around gigabit.
All right. And you mean that with everything enabled, like firewalling and prevention and detection and all that stuff, because that adds a lot more requirements on the hardware itself if you want to enable everything. Yeah. Yeah,
in principle, yes, but of course you can enable so much more in OPNsense that's not accounted for. You can also have a VPN and a hub proxy and whatever.
Right.
We're just looking at the standard firewall and Suricata.
Right. There's a lot more needs that need to be calculated. Okay, understood. Next question. APU2 is safe to run Suricata at a reasonable speed, or it should be used with proper big servers? And I must admit I'm not too well versed with APU2.
Yeah, I think that's the PC Engine's board. Right. Pascal Donnier. Yeah, sure. You can certainly run Suricata in combination with OPNsense on such a board. Performance-wise, you can't expect, of course, gigabit performance with that. I think you should expect something in the region of 100 megabit and maybe a little bit more. So if you have 100 megabit networks, you might be fine. Maybe disable some rules if it's too much, and don't add too many other things. So it's a perfectly sane board. It's not for the super heavy usage.
Understood. Understood. Thank you. Next question: is it possible to alert via email on detected intrusions?
We already answered that, I guess.
Yeah. No. So principle, no. You have to set up something yourself.
Right.
No, I think there's something in Monet, and I think Michael documented something some time ago, but I'm not entirely sure. It has been try the forum. If somebody did it, he's probably active at the forum.
Yeah, the Monet is, by the way, is a reporting system that's in OPNsense that you can use to set your own rules on what kind of information you would like to receive over email, for instance. So there are some options that you can trigger on. I'm not entirely certain if Suricata is also something that you can select or trigger on. But yeah, I have to take a look at that.
So I think in that case, it's better off to actually go in the forum and ask if somebody else has already not done that in some other way, because I'm sure folks have already done it. It's not.
Yeah, sure.
It's an email.
If it's possible, then probably has already been tried. There are 17,000 registered users on that forum, so somebody has seen it before.
Which is an impressive number, the way that's good. That's good.
Thanks.
Next question. How can I test or find out if my adapter is full Netmap capable?
Yeah, just try it out. That's and make sure you can access the box on another way, because if that's pretty annoying about Netmap. It disconnects your interface. So if it doesn't work, the rest of your traffic is not going to be passed. So if you have the board available, just try it out. We usually advise Intel chips because they're pretty good supported in FreeBSD. And everything else is just try it out.
So the simple answer is enable it. If your system doesn't work anymore, it doesn't work.
Right.
Just simple.
And otherwise it probably works.
Okay, understood.
With some small caveats, but most of the cases when you enable it and nothing weird happens, it will probably not happen at all either. I think I have seen some very specific case with a very specific setup that ran into issues with Netmap, but if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You'll see that's right straight away normally.
Understood. Okay, next question. Is it possible to set up specific rules for different interfaces? I think you kind of answer that IPS, IDS mode, and all that stuff. So
there's a demand for that, Peter.
Yeah. I am reading them out loud, no problem, And it's on record, so yes.
Uh-oh.
No problem. I feel the pressure. Yes. Okay.
Anyway.
Next question. I use GNS3 as my testing tool. I see the last update on the appliance is OPNsense. This is UBV, posted by Jeremy Grossman, 19th of September 2017. When do you think you will update? I'm not really sure what the background. I know GNC, but I'm not really sure the background of the question.
GNC? No, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we can take that question a bit more detail offline afterwards to the forum or something like that. Do you think that's a good idea, or for a bit more detailed information?
I don't know what he's referring to. If it's a port on OPNsense, then it's probably a FreeBSD updates it will be updated as well.
I think GNS, if I'm not mistaken, GNS is a general network simulator. So I'm really not sure the question, but okay, we can take that, I guess, offline at one of the forums in that case for a bit more detail. What exactly is it after? Okay, next question. ruleset abuse.ch URL house adds about 200,000 rules and crashes Suricata on all 4 OPNsense systems I manage. Is that normal behavior? So in other words, when your low URL house releases like 200,000 rules that basically block URLs.
I think they changed that recently.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yeah, I think they did. I saw something from Michael passing by complaining about the output from one of these lists. So I think it's that one. We don't really filter well the amount of rules that's being passed. So if your box can't handle the amount of rules, yeah, that's a problem. We might look into to cutting it off at some limit, but yeah,
the difficulty then
normally
is
you don't want to do that. You
right.
either want it or you don't want it, and if your box isn't large enough to handle these rule sets, you better not enable them.
So I think basically yes and no. No, it's not normal behavior for a system that's beefy enough. But yes, it's normal behavior for something that is not beefy enough. If you do not have enough RAM, for instance, then the system will crash on that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree from the perspective of IDSing and all that stuff. I know that there's there's a lot of different sources for rules, and
yeah,
if there's one thing that affects a lot the performance of Suricata is actually a rule or the way a rule is written, for example, or the amount. So you should make sure, you know, at the very least, like test, for example, if possible, of course, in a very production like your environment, if that's possible, and then optimize. But beefy enough box, you should not have a problem with that, to be very honest. I use these and others, and with the new features in Suricata, a lot of data sets too, in the millions of it, and I didn't experience that, as you said, if the Suricata is beefy enough, at least in my case anyway.
Yeah, and some of these, for some of these rules, if you want to use large lists of IP addresses, you might also switch to normal firewall aliases, because they are probably easier to fetch in a large list, can handle a lot of rules, so a lot of addresses. It doesn't really matter. You can increase your memory a little bit if the lists are growing quite rapidly, and it's at least it won't crash out. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, so that's also nice of it. Of course, you can leverage a little bit between the functionality of Suricata and OPNsense in general. So that's certainly a way to do it if your system isn't beefy enough and you still want to have those IPs blocked. So yeah, sure.
Cool. Thank you, folks. Next question. I have about 6 more, FYI. Is it possible to send alerts through any medium? I think you might have already answered that. I'm not sure.
No, syslog. You can use syslog ng, and you can configure targets. So if you enable EVE logging to syslog in Suricata, then you can use our syslog targets to send it anywhere else using either TCP or UDP logging. There is some limitation, and that's mainly if you want to log the payload. It will be cut off at I think 2 kilobytes, because there's a maximum size for a syslog message in FreeBSD, or in BSDs in general, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. How does OPNsense update Suricata? Asking because of the new version there is.
Meaning new version, the test version or the release?
At the release, I think.
Yeah, well, usually we try to stick quite close to the latest Suricata version. But certainly if changes are larger, we try to bootstrap the larger updates into our major upgrades. So that means either in January or in July. And if there are smaller updates, we usually take them up front. But it's also about impact. So we're not going to release major upgrades in a minor upgrades if we think the impact is too large. But we do very often, by the way, ship a development version. So if you switch to development from OPNsense, you'll often get the latest one. Not at the moment yet. I don't think we have compiled a Suricata version for FreeBSD yet.
That's good to know. I did not know that. So you guys have a dev version that you update much more often than the rest. Okay. That's
yeah, you can easily switch to the dev version from the user interface. So if you go to firmware, then you go to settings, and then you can say, well, I don't want the production version, but I want the development version. You can just upgrade to that. And if you offer a different Suricata version for development, you automatically get that one. That's how we done it in the past as well.
Okay, that's great to know. I did not know that, so that's very good. That's excellent. Next question. It's not a question, it's just, I think, more of a statement. Just email Decisio. They're awesome to build your custom appliance. You can do this with other firewall providers. So I think this is a thank you note.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next question. In your tests, what OS is more efficient for IPS like Suricata, performance-wise? Linux or HardenedBSD?
That's not comparisons that we make. We only look at the performance of FreeBSD, which is, of course, sometimes better, sometimes less. Things change all the time. And we found Netmap, and certainly an inline modus that we use now, really a very, very good setup and a good match between the ease of use and performance. So I think with commodity hardware, you can still have a very good performance for reasonable pricing with FreeBSD or HardenedBSD. I don't think in general, there doesn't have to be much of a difference. The only thing is if you're going to tweak stuff and you know exactly what you're doing, you probably are able to do a little bit more with Linux. But I don't have any statistics for that. But also things like cursive site scaling and such are not very good supported in FreeBSD, but they are in Linux. So probably with the right hardware, you can easily have more performance with Linux than with FreeBSD. But then you have to know what you're doing, of course.
Right. Okay. Next question. Any issues in running it as a VM on KVM with virt.io, for example?
Yes, user issues.
Okay.
No, just joking. No, normally things work. Most of the things work very well within a virtualized environment. Of course, performance does differ. There is a performance impact on virtualizing stuff. But in general, again, if you know what you're doing, you can virtualize OPNsense very well. We do have some plugins for specific things like if you use VMware or Xen. So, yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that at all.
Okay, cool. So this is more and more to come up, I'm guessing. There's a lot more and more being virtualized and moved around in cloud environments and similar other stuff. So I'm guessing this is a very hot topic.
Yeah,
I assume, yes, for you guys. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Next question. A question for Suricata representatives. How can I bypass peer-to-peer traffic in order to avoid drops in speed? I'll try to answer from the perspective of, let's say, IDS, not entirely IPS, because you folks are much more well-versed into that. But from the perspective of network security monitoring, IDS and all that, I don't think, if you have tried everything else and it has come down to that you need to bypass peer-to-peer traffic, for example, then I think you can simply do that by, there's a good few ways you can do that, either by match list, for example, or you can use data sets, or you can use the pass routine in alert rules, or you can lock it by for example, TLS or SNI or domain or similar things. It really depends what exactly you're trying to do. There is a lot more documentation in the README, Suricata read docs, how to bypass traffic. You can, of course, use BP filters and similar as well. That is possible too. You can also employ more advanced eBPF filtering as well, available. That does require a bit more coding, though, of course, on the filter side. But there are plenty of options, to be very honest, and it really depends what exactly you want to bypass and why. On the setup, the very least, as well, because in general, and we do that through all the Suricata trainings. In general, if there are 4 major points of affecting the Suricata performance, order independent, I'm going to list them out. Order independent. So, for example, the engine version of Suricata you're running, the type of hardware you're running, the type of power, CPU, memory of the hardware you're running, the type of traffic you're inspecting, and last but not least, the rules that you're running. Are they relevant to the traffic? How many rules were loaded? Have they been tested and similar things? So, if you lock those 3 and you experiment with the 4th one, that's the way to usually achieve full performance. At least that's how I would suggest. That's how I do it all the time. At least from the perspective of network security monitoring, intrusion detection. But Alfox, I'll transfer it over to you for IPS specifically.
Yeah, for IPS specific, I don't really know, to be honest.
No, I meant if there's something more in terms of IPS that you would actually advise or suggest of how to bypass or drop traffic.
No, we don't really we don't really offer bypass options. So Netmap, we don't have anything to bypass either, like you have in the hardware options. So choose wisely in your rules. If you have high performance setups, make sure to choose wisely.
Okay. Next question. Can we use the reverse proxy to offloading SSL and send all clear traffic in Suricata in local?
No. Well, you can probably do so, but we don't. We don't offer user options over there. I think you can. Well, you can let Suricata listen to localhost and pass traffic in. There are some concepts you can apply, but we can't easily provide it from a user perspective, so that you can just click it around and edit. What you can do is use the proxy to do inspection and do offloading over there. But well, you're always doing a man in the middle, so you have to offload the certificate to your clients, and yeah, I'm personally not a huge fan of it. But
also, I don't think there are many rules that would be useful for this scenario at the moment, at least not that we provide.
No, that's correct. That's the other end. We did some testing a couple of months ago, but it was more for a special client, and we tried to embed Suricata into the ICAP stream from the proxy. So feed traffic in, pass it through ICAP, and well, just pass it back so you can inspect it. But well, the problem is you wouldn't hit anything on that end, because Suricata, by my knowledge, doesn't understand the ICAP headers. So you have to change the traffic first to strip the headers to something different, and then it gets rather complicated. You can do something with Bro. In that regard, but it is complicated. So it's for what we serve most, not very interesting.
In other words, this is like a highly customized setup where maybe you'd be better off if you can plug in off to, or where maybe you'd be better off if you're just revising the architecture a little bit and then position or the setup differently.
Yeah, that's correct. You can do a lot, and you can do a lot in customized environments. But if you want to deliver a solution that's just clickety-click for most users, things get complicated.
I can relate that. I can understand that. Yeah. There's just so many variables. Next question for this easier. Is there any plan to build a switch version or a router of OPNsense?
OPNsense is a router, but it's a firewall, it's a router, it's not a switch. But a switch is also more a hardware kind of thing than a software kind of thing. I mean that for switching you need a different type of hardware. So no, not a switch, but it is a router. So the only thing that you need to do to use OPNsense as a router is configure the different interfaces. You can also use VLAN. So if you have a firewall, for instance, with 10 gigabit, you can hook it up to a 10 gigabit switch and then have as many ports as you like with VLANs set up. And then every port can be used to route traffic in between. You only need to set up the right firewall rule for that. And that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. Another question, or maybe more of a comment. It would be handy to have Chemo guest tools for running OPNsense and KVM virtualizations, just like as VMware tools and Zenguest tools. KVM is a very good and growing virtualization. Red Hat, Oracle, Proxmox, and so on are based on KVM. I guess this is more of a kind of comment or a question, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's more a comment, but well, these things are how they usually work is if there is a ports package in the FreeBSD ports for such a virtualization extension. It's not a lot of work to add a plugin on our end, so you can install it via the user interface. But if there isn't a port package, it's more of an upstream problem. We usually don't try to invent the wheel over there. So if it's already there, it's probably a small contribution. And if there are a lot of people trying to do that, they can try to ask for the required package on our end if it's in the ports repository. And somebody needs to write a plugin, which I think quite some people can do. But if there isn't a ports package for it, things get more complicated.
Understood. Last question. For OPNsense HA configuration, which is the recommended speed for PF sync interface 1G or 10G? Are there any recommendations?
Yeah, normally 1 gigabit is way more than enough. You're only exchanging states.
Okay. In a normal situation, depending of course on what kind of traffic that you're handling, but what I see in normal situations, then there is not much traffic going over that interface. So it doesn't really make sense to use a 10 gigabit interface unless you have a spare for that and you don't have any other. Understood.
We have actually run out of questions, believe it or not. So there were about 30 of those for this session. I just wanted to say to everybody, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much to the OPNsense folks for coming along. Much appreciated you supporting actively us all the time. And for the latest and greatest, you have all the links for OPNsense there, and the All About Suricata. If there's any questions, we also have the Suricata IO forums. I would just like to say again, thank you on everybody that joined us. Thank you on the OPNsense folks. Thank you on all the people that made this possible. Anything back to you folks from this issue? If anything I've missed or I've misbehaved, I'll take the cue. Thank you.
No. Thank you very much, Peter. We are very pleased with having this opportunity. And of course, that would not be such a great OPNsense without Suricata, which is a very, very big part of our solution that users use many times in many different situations. So we are just as pleased with you as you are with us.
Much appreciated. I have no other questions at the moment, but I reserve the right to maybe annoy you later on. So, thank you very much for a great presentation. It was I've never really had a chance before to sit for 1 hour with you folks and go through all the web interface and all that. So very much appreciated. It was very interesting for me. I learned a few things. Much appreciated. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for who tuned in today.
Much appreciated. I think with that, we're just gonna end this session. Thank you once again for all who joined here.